think to myself, did I just grenade my brand new motor? What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time viewing my videos, welcome. I hope you'll like some of these and subscribe to the channel. And if you continue to watch my videos, I appreciate the support. Thank you for tuning in. You'll notice I'm missing one car from the garage, and that is the Pantera. And I should have had it done by now. It should be sitting right there, but it's not. I'm gonna fill you in on what's been going on with that car and why you're not seeing it sitting in my garage today. 3 weeks ago, I decided that the Pantera had been sitting for way too long. The motor was done, the transaxle was done, all the parts were here, and I just wasn't getting anything done on the actual car as far as putting everything together. So I decided to call up a friend of mine, a gentleman I had met when I first got the car. Super nice guy. His name is Mike. And he said, hey, bring it down here. I'll help you out. We'll get you back on the road. So it was a Monday morning, and my wonderful wife helped me push the car off of my lift, up the driveway, into the street, and then ultimately onto my trailer. And I took the car down to Mike's house. Tuesday in the morning, I loaded up the engine and the transaxle and all the other, just knick-knack parts and stuff that were laying around. Brought those down, and Tuesday was the day that we really kind of got started on the car. The first thing that we were going to do is get the flywheel and clutch put onto the motor, and then put the transaxle on and get it ready to stab back in the car. The type of person I am, I like to kind of have everything ready to go so that it is kind of a seamless process. I had all of my nuts and bolts and everything in bags. Everything was tagged, all organized. The flywheel had just been turned. It was ready to go. The clutch was brand new in the box. So we get the motor set out and we put the flywheel on. And then we go to bolt the clutch on and the holes don't line up. Well, the clutch that came off this car was a center force clutch. And the correct clutch for this car is a McLeod clutch. So obviously it wasn't going to line up. And what had happened was the flywheel that I had was a center force flywheel for a 351 Cleveland, but obviously it went to a center force clutch, which I now did not have. So I'm jumping on the phone, calling people, just seeing who has a flywheel that I can go and buy real quick and get back on this thing so I'm not holding everybody up. Mike actually ended up having one that had been machined already prior to, months or maybe a year ago, whatever, so it had some surface rust. Not a big deal. I spent about an hour and a half cleaning that up and getting it ready, and we noticed that the bolts that were originally on the center force clutch were they were header bolts. They weren't even the right ones. So he ran to get some bolts and I cleaned up the flywheel, and about an hour and a half later or so we were back to where we originally started that day. So we get the clutch on, everything is fine, and I have the transaxle up on the back of my truck, and I'm just I'm taking a video of it real quick and taking some pictures just because it looks really cool in the sunlight, the way it's powder coated. I'm glad I did that. I'll tell you in a minute why that actually worked out in our favor. So we get it filled with the gear oil and we get it down on the ground, lined up, bolted to the motor. So now we have motor, clutch, transmission, everything is good to go, ready to go in the car. It's getting to be late afternoon in that first day there, but we get the motor into the car and get everything lined up, put the mounts in, put the bolts in, get everything tightened down, and I think, awesome, we're good to go. Well, I start looking through my little bin of parts and looking through my, my little baggies that are tagged with all the bolts, and I find this one that says transaxle bell housing. And there's a bunch of little nuts in there, and then there's two, probably 4-inch bolts or so. And I hold it up, and I look at Mike and I said, hey, do I still need these? And I could tell by the look on his face when he saw that bag of hardware, I knew right away. I was like, we're in trouble. Something didn't get put in. This is just going to be a disaster. Those 2 bolts that were in this bag go in the bottom of the bell housing to the transaxle from the inside. Well, the transaxle's already on the motor. I don't know if those have been replaced when I had the transaxle rebuilt. The person that did it for me put the bell housing back on and put all new bolts around it, or all new nuts around it, and that's why I had those leftover ones. But I don't remember if he put 2 new bolts in and that's why I have leftovers, or maybe he told me, hey, I didn't put these in, you got to put those in, and I'm just, I just spaced and forgot about it over time. So thankfully I had taken that video. So I go back and I'm checking it out, and sure enough, no bolts in the bottom portion of that bell housing to the transaxle. Now, everything's in the car already. It's been tightened down, like we're moving on. Months earlier, Mike had given me a tip to replace the studs that were on the mounts for the transaxle and use bolts instead. The reason for that is if you ever had to take that transaxle out of the car, you did not have to pull the engine and transaxle together. You could simply pull these bolts out. There's 3 on each side, pull the mounts off, and then you could get the transaxle out. Thank goodness I had done that, and that's exactly what we had to do. So we got in there, we pulled those mounts off. He was able to then straddle this thing, and we jacked up the motor just enough to get a decent angle that we could pull this thing off, get to it underneath, put those 2 bolts in, get it lined back up, and then set back down. Now, it's not a very difficult process. It's a pain in the butt for sure, and it set us back probably an hour and a half, 2 hours that day. So that was pretty much almost that whole day was just getting that finally put together and in the car. Here we are, start of day 3, which would be Wednesday. I got down there in the morning. Now, he doesn't live close, so it's an hour drive for me to get down there, and then it's like an hour or so, give or take, with traffic to get home in the evenings. But I got down there, in the morning, and I'm fired up. The motor's in there. We just got to do all the knick-knack stuff, finish the cooling lines, and do all the wiring, plug everything in, and then we're going to fire this bad boy up. So we spent most of the day, getting all that stuff squared away, and it started getting into evening, and I still did not have my 90-degree fitting for the fuel tank. What we had planned on doing was, instead of pulling fuel from the top down to the pump, the tanks on these cars have a plug that you can just remove, put a 90 in there, and you can run it straight over to the fuel pump. And that's what I decided to do. Another hour and a half running around to the hardware store, finding the right fittings and the right sizes that everything's going to fit together, only to get back, get it all together, and then have it leak on us when we put, a small amount of gas in there just to test it. I learned a very valuable lesson that day, that pipe, thread, tape, the white stuff, is not going to hold up to fuel. Stupid me. I should have known that, but whatever. My mind was on some other things that day, so I overlooked it. Not a big deal. The plan was to just get the right stuff that night on the way home from the auto parts store, and then find something else to kind of seal around it. We'd do that in the morning, let it sit while we changed out the valve covers to these brand new covers I had, and then by later in the day we would be good to go. Well, Mike is such a generous person. He ended up taking care of that for me that evening, so when I showed up the next day, he already had it, gooped up, and it was already almost cured and ready to go, which saved us a ton of time, and I didn't have to fiddle with that in the morning. This is Thursday now, and we got our fuel issue, the leaks and stuff taken care of, so we fill up the tank, we're good to go, no leaks. We're ready to fire this thing up, and I'm excited, but I'm nervous at the same time. if you've ever spent this much time and money building an engine, your first startup, you have no idea what's going to happen. I was optimistic, but nonetheless very, very nervous. I get in the car and I turn the key and it starts to fire for a second, but it's not getting enough fuel yet. Not a problem. Squirt a little bit down in the carb. Turn the key the second time and the thing comes to life. And it sounds awesome. We go to adjust the timing just a little bit, get everything squared away there, fire it back up. It's just an amazing sound this car makes. I had a big grin on my face. It worked. All that time and effort that I had put into it had paid off. Decide we're going to let the car run, and get up to temperature, so we need to let the car run for 5 minutes or so. Well, about a minute in, I hear a noise. Shut it down. It's a ticking noise that I heard, which typically would be, a rocker or something like that. We decided to pull the valve covers off and check out the rockers. Sure enough, that number 1 cylinder rocker arm was just completely loose. I was pretty confident in my assembly skills, and I knew I had taken the time to check everything. It was really odd that just that one rocker arm was loose, and we decided, just for good measure, we're going to pull the intake manifold and double check the lifters. Maybe one of the roller lifters, so maybe one of the wheels had broken off or something like that down inside would cause this rocker arm to loosen up. We removed the intake and carb as one unit and started pulling pieces out. Everything looked good. The rocker arm was fine, the push rod was fine, and the roller lifters, there's 2 connected, pulled those out, everything was fine. No damage, nothing was broken. After talking about it for a little bit, we kind of concluded that maybe when I was putting it together and I put the push rod in, I must have just caught the edge of the lifter and then tightened everything down, and then as the motor was running, it kind of worked itself into the center where it should have been, and that's what caused the rocker arm to loosen up. Now that the intake was off, I kind of wasted those 2 gaskets, so it was like another 3-hour journey to Summit Racing to get new gaskets to replace those. So from Mike's house to Summit Racing and back, it burned a lot of time, but we got it back together. But when we pulled the intake manifold and carburetor off, we set it off to the side, and once we got the rocker arm tightened down, we were ready to put it back together, I go to pick it up, and when I did, I leaned it back. Well, there's gas in the carburetor still, which leaked out onto my crotch and soaked my shorts. Whatever, I didn't really think much of it until about 2 or 3 minutes later when it started burning a lot. So here I am, pulling my shorts out and trying to waddle through the shop and figure out how I'm gonna keep this from burning. I finally grabbed a shop rag and I'm stuffing it down my pants. And note to self, be careful around gas. Obviously you don't want it spilling on you, but you certainly don't want it spilling on your crotch. Here we are, back in the car, kind of back to square one, if you will, about to start it up again and move on. I go to turn the key, car fires right up, only this time I heard a different noise. And the different noise that I heard was one that I knew deep down in my gut it was going to be catastrophic. immediately shut the car down. We pulled the number one plug out, and just the bottom of this plug was just beat to crap. I mean, just, it was flattened. My heart kind of sank because I knew something inside was just done. Now, this is probably 5 o'clock or so in the evening, and it's about the time that I probably would have headed home, but I couldn't just leave the car sitting there and not know what was happening. So I had to stay. I had to pull the head off this thing. I had to know what let loose, what happened. A couple months earlier, Mike had suggested that I not use the head studs that were originally on this block, and to change them out for just the regular bolts that go in the heads. And I'm glad he did that, and I'm glad I listened, because if I had head studs on there, I would not have been able to remove the head with the motor in the car. Thankfully, by changing to the bolts, I now had the room I needed to get that head off. And the second we popped it off and I looked underneath, I mean, it was like another kick in the crotch. The valve seat had dropped, the valve dropped, it hit the top of the piston and just destroyed the piston. You could see the valve seat just hanging on the valve on that number one cylinder. All I could really think about at that point was, I've just destroyed this motor that I just spent so much time and money on. What do I do? Where do I go from here? It was a feeling of just emptiness and sadness, really, as I just looked down at this mess. I guess the car gods had other plans for me that day. You know, the motor had only run really for about a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes before this happened. Yeah, I remember just leaning over the car, staring at these broken pieces, not saying anything. I couldn't really put anything together to say, but Mike has been doing this for so long. He reassured me right away, just, you know what, this isn't a big deal. We'll just, I'll pop the pan off, we'll pull the piston out through the bottom, we don't have to take the motor out. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, this is a huge deal, right? And he's just reassuring me, no, well, we'll get it taken care of, it's not a big deal. We'll get a new piston on there, we'll get the head out to the machine shop, we'll get it fixed, and we'll be ready to go. Thank you so much, Mike, for doing that, because it put me at ease a little bit, but that was a tough hour or so drive home that night. I didn't sleep much that night. I remember getting up about 3 o'clock in the morning and going out, sitting on my couch, and I'm looking through eBay, and I'm trying to find a piston because I know I have to replace this piston. Luckily, I found a seller had 2 pistons for sale. One was a 40 thousandths and one was a 30 thousandths, and that's what I needed, was that 30 thousandths piston. So without even hesitation, buy it now, let's get this thing sent out, let's get it on its way so I can get this thing fixed and back together as soon as possible. I knew I was leaving for vacation that following Monday, and I was going to be gone, but I told Mike, you know, I'm going to have my phone, I bought this piston, I'm going to have it sent to your house so you can get moving on this stuff, just, you know, kind of keep me in the loop. I was tracking it through the eBay app and all this, and it got delivered on a Monday. Great, I think everything's good to go. I relax and I'm enjoying my vacation. Tuesday morning, I get a text. You got the wrong piston. What? I know I ordered the right one. So I'm jumping back in the app and I'm looking through my purchases, and sure enough, like, I ordered that 30 thousandths Keith Black 177 piston. I knew I ordered the right one. It turns out the seller had just mistakenly sent me the other one that he had for sale as well. It took another day and a half or so going back and forth in emails with the seller explaining what had happened, and, you know, he was gracious enough to get the right one out to us by FedEx, and, you know, 2 days later we had the correct piston. And here I am again thinking we're in the clear, but nope, Not just yet. The new piston that showed up was indeed the 30 thousandths over, the one that I needed, the one that I originally ordered, but the skirt was cracked. Mike had taken it up to the machine shop, was going to have it pressed onto the rod, and as soon as they opened the box and pulled it out, there it is. The bottom is just completely cracked. That piston's junk, and I'm back to square one. At some point you kind of feel like, when is this streak of bad luck going to end? Where do we stand now? The head is being fixed at this new machine shop. I don't have to buy a new one, thank goodness. He's able to repair it. He's going to order the piston himself. Each piston has a certain weight, so they try to match it to your old one as close as possible. They're going to order that at the machine shop and just have it sent straight there. They're waiting on the valve from Edelbrock to be sent there. Everything's going to get taken care of, and Mike is going to get the bottom end of that motor put back together. And he basically told me, once he gets the piston rod put in and gets the pan back on there, it's like 2 days of he and I working on it to get it running, and I'll have a done car finally. In the meantime, I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that my bad luck streak is over and everything is kind of smooth sailing from here. I hope everything goes together as it should. All the correct parts show up. I'm just going to try to stay positive and hope for the best. Well, that is the update on the Pantera. Thanks for checking out this episode, guys. I hope you'll check back in, subscribe to see the car done and back here in the garage very soon. It's going to work out. So thanks for watching, guys. Stay hungry, stay foolish.